Looks like we're live.
Hey, looks like we're live.
We're
Sweet.
back. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Not bad. I feel like
I
in the Pacific Northwest, when the weather gets nicer, I feel better. How about you?
yeah, we opened up all the doors to the house and it's lovely right now. Um I got a photo. I saw a photo on Facebook from Tony's relatives in near Detroit, and
Great.
they are not experiencing similar weather there.
Oh, that is unfortunate.
They have a lot of snow on the ground.
Yeah, I think the northeastern U.S. will sometimes
Yeah.
get snow into March. Hey,
Yep.
it's rough.
Oh,
Yeah,
hey,
I
I'm
don't
still using
miss.
the bottle.
Oh, look at that, drinking the water. I did read up a little bit on like the myth of drinking water and stuff like that. I think the current guidance is to drink when you're thirsty, but yeah, I think if you're not drinking at all, drinking some is good. But I still drink like 2 liters of water a day. Old habits die hard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's generally good, or anything. Yeah, but I would go, beyond the coffee that I would drink. The
Right,
2 cups of coffee, that might be the only fluids I take in the whole day.
right. I say this as
Which,
somebody who's like got acid reflux and drinks a lot of coffee and needs to stay away from it. But
mm,
I recently went to the dentist, and I'm up. There's a segue in here. Spoiler alert about hygiene, but basically just talking about like flossing as an adult and like
mm,
the things that you drink, and water is one of those things, right? Like the more you drink clear liquids, the better it is for your mouth not to have
right,
acid around and stuff like that. So it's also good for your dental health. But on the
right.
subject of hygiene, I thought maybe we could pick up where we left off from last week on this DevOps report, because we were talking
I
about
was a little bit
CI/CD
scared
and
about where you're
yeah,
going to go with this
yeah,
because,
exactly.
what?
Well, we were talking about GitOps and CI/CD, and it feels to me, yeah, exactly, like what DevOps has become seems to be a little bit more on the GitOps or maybe the CI/CD side. Unfortunately, I still think it means a little bit more than that, but here we are. And in the midst of this report, that's kind of where we stop, because there's a lot of stuff I'd like to talk around GitOps, sorry, and GitHub
Right.
and code and what you do for infra. But I also know that we've got to somehow at some point in time finish this report. So before we get started, I want to say, one, I really like this report. I listened to the episode last time and I was like, I felt a little bit negative. The reason we're talking about it, or at least the reason I want to talk about it, is because I like the report. There's numbers in it. Obviously, the company I currently work for is mentioned in this report, but I'm trying to give an unbiased opinion. I felt like I swung a little bit too far in the other direction, but I really feel like these reports give me kind of like a touch point, at least, to let me know what's going on in the community. And year over
Hmm.
year, I find that these reports are really handy, even though we're picking on 1 year here. But I do like to see adoption curve. So I felt like I should just say, in case anyone watched the last one, felt like we don't like this, I at least do like this report. But I'm also really fond of pedantry and semantics. So here we
Right.
are.
Right.
So yeah, you okay?
Um,
Starting from, I think we were at it was just around what are your challenges in using deploying containers, and right after that, we're talking about the Cloud Native Commuting Foundation report here.
yeah.
We were at Cloud Native Organization's favorite GitOps.
Okay.
Just to
We
give you
talked
like
about release cycles, right?
yes,
Or did we already do release cycle? No, we're just about to get to that.
we're just about to
What
talk
are your
about it.
challenges? What are your challenges? The last thing, right?
You got it, yeah. And
To
some of
what
this,
extent has you? Okay,
yeah, go ahead.
over.
That's it. Okay. So
Okay,
like one of the things that I had in terms of a challenge was making sure that the version of Kubernetes that we had deployed was maybe not the latest and greatest, but at the very least that we had like a scheduled cycle to test that stuff. And what we were doing at the
right,
time, this is about 3 years ago, was running it through CI/CD and making sure that the code, at least that we deploy, still runs. That there's no change
right.
in our code that we know works between Kubernetes versions. And listen, spoiler alert, this is in the 1.08 era, and like it wasn't always the case. Things changed a lot. I think we're
Hmm.
getting towards fewer release cycles, and more towards kind of like an LTS kind of strategy, which isn't covered in this
Mm,
report, but I think is really important when you're thinking about pinning yourself to like a stable version, which is what you do in an operating system, that kind of thing.
right.
I feel like these challenges that we're seeing just in deploying containers is one, then there's like that upkeep. So how do you make sure that like the base image that you're using or the base container image that you're using
Right.
is up to date, that kind of stuff. So this rings true to me, basically, is what I'm saying. The hygiene difficulties, similar to flossing as an adult, seem to be similar here for
Well,
other people.
what is I mean, you what's Datadog doing now? I mean, are they they're releasing, depending on the group you're looking at, whether it's the UI or the back, the
Right.
ingress, or all the different groups have different release schedules.
Right. What I'd say is like it depends is an easy one, because we got a few groups doing different things. We're certainly trying to standardize more on, like the guardrail kind of approaches. So like, here are the images that you can use. Where we are in the process, I'm not sure. I know that is pretty important. I'll also say, just a bit of a plug, we do have a Datadog On episode about Kubernetes where we talk about versions and things like that. But I think similar to many orgs, is like, it kind of depends which team you're talking to. Some may have less frequent release cycles. Some may have their own clusters, that kind of thing. So it kind of depends where you are in Datadog. But I think in terms of a larger organization, standardizing around rapid adoption of things, especially for security fixes, is kind of the goal. Where we are is it 100%? I don't know. And I know the different clouds are different as well. So depending on which region we're deployed in, where we're deployed in, there's like GovCloud and stuff like that comes into play as well. So it's hard to say. So it depends. But I think at the very least, we're trying to be at the forefront of making sure that we're stable and secure, which is it can be tough. If it's tough for an organization like our size, or like Google size, or Facebook, or Apple, or Netflix, I think it would be doubly, if not more so, tough for smaller organizations, the smaller teams that don't have like a significant platform engineering team or SRE team. It can be difficult. Yeah, all that to say, I don't know. It's like the honest answer. Like I don't know. So I've talked to a few people. I know it is for their teams, but it really depends on the org. What about yourself? Is this something that you're seeing in the field? Are people complaining about trying to stay up to date with Kubernetes or containers, or what's the current struggle there? Because it does look like, listen, if half of these people are having an issue, I can't imagine they're alone.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on who is your customer,
right?
And what kind of customer do you have,
right?
I don't know if there's a right answer.
Yeah, it's hard. There's also the people who are doing like the on-prem Kubernetes that might be able to handle being like a release or two behind, where they're cordoned off on a separate VLAN, or maybe they're offline or something like that. It doesn't really matter too much. I'm thinking of, I don't know, Walmart comes to mind, Walmart Labs, where they've got Kubernetes deployed to stores and that reports back to head office or what have you. It might be a little bit different in that kind of scenario than it would be in, say, like an EKS or AKS or GKE deployment, where you're in a cloud vendor, where they help you kind of move between different versions of Kubernetes. I feel like that's a little bit easier. As opposed to
but if within a few if you're 3 versions back, then you're out of support.
Yeah, at least on the AKS side, it can be tough to move. And I do have a cluster. For example, they just got an email again yesterday saying like, hey, by the way, this is being deprecated. You should probably have moved off it already. We're giving you not a final warning, but like, it's yet another polite warning that you got to get off this as soon as possible, which is like, it's fair. I think some of my clusters that are stuck around don't even have RBAC in them. Like, honestly, it's probably time to go.
Yeah.
And the last time this happened, I think they had like wide open control plane was like one of the things that just, you go through, you're checking all the boxes on the default, and luckily the hyperscalers come by later and say, hey, maybe have a look at these.
Yeah.
All right. So I think the two things listed here are like lack of training. So that's kind of what we were talking about last time. Rears its ugly head again. And then security here, yet again, I think that's a common concern, at least in terms of updating stuff. Like, that's a good motivator. So the avoidance of pain, as I like to say, is a good motive or a good incentive to move off it if there's a security breach or concern. And then we get into the GitOps, the fun stuff.
Yes.
So I think basically what they're saying here, the conclusion is that if you're already doing cloud native practices or techniques, then you're probably releasing things using GitOps. So I'd say if you're like already in that ecosystem or that sphere, it's kind of like one of those traits that you'll have, is that you're trying to shove more into pipelines for you, that kind of stuff. So I think definitely rings true for me. But when we look at like all of the respondents and how people are doing some or many, uh, it's not a lot. It's like
Yeah.
the like we were way down here if we add these up quickly. So we're at like 20, 40, yeah, let's say 60% easy. Um, no, 70% easy. Say that they're basically doing some deployments in GitOps,
Some.
and they're trying to get more to it. So it's like
Right.
when I think of GitOps, it's like some sort of process where you put something in a repo, someone looks at it, maybe
Right.
approves it, and it gets deployed into policy and hopefully tested, and then moved on to a higher environment kind of thing. We're not there yet, so there's still quite a
Yeah.
bit of road left. It looks like.
Now, one of the things that's I think is interesting about the term GitOps.
Right.
I've looked it up a few times,
Right.
and many of the people that define it, just like the
Right.
people that define what DevOps is, they define it as, well, with GitOps, it is by definition, it
Mhm.
is pushing to Kubernetes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, which I don't think. I mean, having your infrastructure as code, posting to GitHub or to whatever your Git flavor is, and then having that approved and then automatically deployed.
Right.
It doesn't have to be Kubernetes. Could
But
be
well,
something else.
listen, yeah, I can
But
say
a lot
I've
of the
done some stuff in
tools, I
Packer.
think.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the tools, whether you're talking about Argo or Flux, or I don't know if
Right.
they specifically want Kubernetes and they don't know how to deal with other
Right.
things.
Yeah, like I've been in a Spinnaker shop, for example, where you're mostly pushing out VMs. You can push out other stuff, but like
Mhm.
the kind of the goal, the happy path in Spinnaker is to push out like EC2 images, and that's what we were doing with like Packer, and it can work.
Yeah.
But this is before GitOps was like a term that we bandied about
Term,
all
yeah.
the time. It was just something
People
we
were
did.
doing it before, and then somebody came
Yeah,
up with the term GitOps and said,
slap the
"Well,
label
you
on
have
it.
to be doing it on Kubernetes," which is it's like the whole. We were doing a Datadog or a monitoring company, and then somebody defined observability as a way to distinguish themselves from Datadog, except their definition of observability was what Datadog was already doing. And it's like, yeah,
Neither here nor there. Again,
yeah,
we love semantics and pedantry.
yeah.
So to me, at least, it's the fact that it's kind of automated in terms of the software release process, driven by
Yeah.
Git or
Yeah.
some sort of version.
Some
Because
change
I've
management,
used
yeah,
Perforce as well. Like
yeah.
you can do it. Yeah, wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily recommend it, but there are again not to feel bad or anything like that. There are definitely some shops in gaming still on Perforce.
Got 2 layers.
So it's down there. Yeah, you getting warm there? It's quite warm.
It's getting a little warm in here. Yeah. Gotta pull out my old DevOps shirt.
And then I think the next one here is kind of like that. This is where, for me at least, is like an actually good metric. This is when you put in the metric, people will try to game it. Of course, it can't be just lines of code, but I think we're talking about like how often you release per day. And we're using this. The reason we're bringing it up is because it's one of those DevOps report kind of numbers that we talk about on a regular basis. Like, how far are you along on this process? So if I want to release a security update to my code that I found in prod, how long would it take? And we're using this metric as kind of like a corollary or like an indicator to tell us how quickly that would be. So it's like mean time to deployment, basically. And what we're checking actually is how quickly you deploy already. And that's, I think it's more about cadence as opposed to like what your knee-jerk reaction might be to some problem or some update that you've got to get out there. But again, it's interesting to see like 75% of people are doing maybe weekly. I think if we go a little bit deeper, possibly monthly and quarterly is most of them.
Yeah.
The lion's share is going to be between weekly and monthly.
Yep.
Which is, I think that's pretty standard in a small shop.
Yeah.
In a big company like Datadog or others, it's definitely multiple times a day. But yeah, I think that kind of depends on the shop that you've got, the number of devs that you've got as well. Will possibly factor into this number of teams.
And it also depends on, again, how the tool, the software is being used. If it's requires a little bit of hand holding to deploy it to a server system, and you need to have lots of users then connecting to that system, having it daily or multiple times a day, that could be too much. And
Right.
now I remember early on at Datadog, looking at the charts of how many people were on all the different versions of the agent. And I
Right.
think this was last time I really looked, was right when version 6 of the agent came out, which was the transition to Go.
Right.
Um, and you could see there were the spread of agents was huge, and that,
Right.
I mean, we were releasing the agent every 6 months to a year. So even with that fast cycle, people were stuck on older agents for a long time, and because it
Definitely.
requires this manual, or at least maybe not a manual step, but some step that needs to be, you need to be
It could
sure
be
that it's going to
manual.
work with
Yeah.
all your systems. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. In some
um
shops, I'm sure some of this stuff is still manual.
and a company like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, something that's maybe more end user focused, or
Right.
running on my desktop, Chrome or Arc or whatever your browser of choice
Yep.
is. That might be updating every day, or every few days, or every multiple times a day, but you don't
Yeah.
know. It's basically the next time you restart your browser, it's a new browser. And
Absolutely, which makes
yeah,
testing hard and stuff like that. And there's
yeah.
some, like, so there is like a Chrome Enterprise version that's kind of like locked down a little bit more, which doesn't release
Mm,
as frequently, which is more enterprise friendly. But I
yeah.
think that enterprise audience specifically could take a little bit longer to actually get things updated and
Hmm.
tested. And if it's in a regulated environment, approved, you gotta go through like a release cycle. It can be
Yep.
difficult. Sometimes you need to update in like an SOP doc before delivering certain
Hmm.
apps. Like I've been in some of these. SOP is standard operating procedure, but like in terms of support, like what is the impact of this change? You need
Right.
to write it down. Need to, even if there's no impact, you need to say there is no impact to the
Right.
support in this doc. Like they're actually, you need to version bump some of your docs
Right.
basically, which can be a pain. So I get
And
it.
I,
I understand.
yeah.
As it becomes more
And also
mainstream,
it
we're
depends
getting more users.
on how automated your release process is. I mean,
Definitely.
if you're totally on board with the GitOps way,
Right.
then it's maybe an approval or two in Git, or by somebody, and then it's released. But if it's a more manual process, then it might take a long time, from the time I say, okay, let's go for it, to the time it's
Right.
actually out there in the world, might be a while.
Right. And some of this is like hidden behind the scenes, but there's like the whole microservices revolution of being able
Yep.
to deploy like just enough on a regular basis. Whereas
Hmm.
in some case, let's say you're deploying like an iOS app or an Android app, and you've
Hmm.
got third-party dependencies, or like another API that you're using,
Yeah.
maybe 5, 6, 7 APIs that you're using for external
Yeah.
processes. It can be difficult to push like what is essentially a monolithic deployment out, even though it
Right.
is microservices, because you're deploying like an APK or an iOS app, and
Hmm.
it can be like a
Hmm.
large deployment piece, and like there's a lot of testing involved in it. So listen, I get it. I guess what I'm trying to say, and this is maybe my philosophy speaking, but it's like we're not looking at Plato's cave. We're looking at the shadows on the wall. So this is like an after effect of like the cadence that you
Sure.
want to have that's true to your organization. We're using a metric per day kind of thing, which is for a
Right.
certain type of org. But depending on the org that you're in, like basically don't feel bad if you're not doing this
Yeah.
on a daily
Yeah.
basis. If you got
Yeah.
reasons for it, I think the key metric that you're looking for is if you had to change something quickly, how long would that take?
Yeah.
All right, that's my soapbox. So
Yeah.
I'll put it back. All right. So the next one here is the CNCF end users, and they're talking about like just to set the stage. So a little bit more advanced in terms of the usage of Kubernetes, and they're probably more likely to maintain Kubernetes environments with more than 10 clusters. So when I say 10 clusters, so let's assume like maybe you're sharding. So you've got like a prod one,
Hmm.
prod two, Europe and in US, and then chances are you've got the same for staging. So you've got that's 4. And then we're talking about dev
Yeah.
environments, which you may have a few of, or a UAT environment or a QA environment,
Yep.
performance, that kind of thing. So you can get to 10 pretty easy. But I feel like for orgs that aren't large, like getting 3 is probably where they'd start. So you'd get
Yeah.
like your dev test, your staging, and your prod kind of thing.
And I guess this probably doesn't include the development servers that might exist, or development clusters that might exist on individual developer workstations.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be. I think this is more about the maturity level. So, like, are you
Yeah.
currently testing Kubernetes at this point in time, or
Yeah.
have you deployed it to prod, kind of thing? They just sort of set the stage in terms of like
Yeah.
the end users themselves are pretty advanced. So, like, take this with a grain of salt if you're not like this
Yeah.
advanced with Kubernetes, but if you are, chances are you're using it in prod. So I'd assume like if you're familiar with software and you like the benefits of it, then you'd probably be using it in prod.
Hmm.
But there are some end users who are still in the piloting, evaluating phase.
Yeah.
I think what they're trying to say is like, hey, when you look at the non-end users, don't be surprised when you see that these numbers are lower. This is
Yep.
why. And then, yeah, for the non-end users we're looking at. So for the end users, it's 65%-ish in prod, and the non-end users is right around 50%. So like it's half
And how did
half.
you interpret end user versus non-end user in their
So I think
definition?
So I think end user is one of those CTAs. So it's one of the things that CNCF is trying to capture from this. So it's one of the outputs. But basically, they want you to join as an end user. And I believe, I haven't done it yet, when you sign up, there's like a form that you fill out, and they probably pull you on a regular basis. Again,
Right.
as not an end user, I can't say. But I would
Right.
assume that's where they get their numbers, is from polling the people
Yeah.
who are already end users.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, right under that, of course, is the call to action saying like, hey, if you want to join as an end user, do it now. And I think that actually helps like give more numbers. I realize that the incentive for this report is to like give more information about the community and to share with the community, but it also kind of helps the CNCF to figure out what's going on out there in the landscape, because these surveys are non-trivial. Like you've got some info in the back end, but you've also got like some self-reporting. You've got to mix the two together. So it can be pretty difficult. So I can see why they're trying to incentivize people to join and make the numbers
right,
be more accurate. All right, and then we're down to.
Oh yeah, I see the definition right below of end user.
Yeah.
Dope.
It's all good.
Yep.
I think that's how it works, right? It's like when you're doing a presentation and somebody asks you a question that's like answered on the next slide.
Or even on that slide, and you're like, oh.
You know, you're listening to me and I'm flattered. However,
yeah,
the answer's not there on the slide. I get it. I'm definitely that person as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this next one is Kubernetes yet to be fully deployed outside of the cloud native community. So like basically outside of the cloud native people who are like in this community, is saying that there's still some pie basically left to be had for an alternate, orchestrator, be it I think Mesos is still alive, or DCOS, or I think that's D2IQ now, or there was Docker Swarm, I believe, which is under Moratis.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of stuff basically is still out there. I don't know. I feel like it's probably not too soon to say Kubernetes is kind of like won this battle, but there are alternative orchestrators out there, and the question is, people go down that road.
Any opinions on? I think this counts as an alternate orchestration tool, Maersk.
I've not heard of Maersk. The shipping company Maersk.
No, you would think so. They've the name is MRSK, which happens to be the stock symbol for Maersk. So not a really great name, but because it deals with containers. But Maersk is something that 37 Signals put together as a, they have a blog post pretty recently saying we're leaving the cloud. And it's going to save us $7 million a year by getting off the cloud.
Oh, this sounds like a 37 Signals, kind of article.
Yeah, and then so they built their own. They're mostly calling it a deployment tool, but it's a replacement to Kubernetes for them because they saw. And there's a video, an interesting video by DHH. I forget what it stands for. Ruby on Rails fame. Talking about Maersk and using Maersk and how it's, they can be up and running in 10, 20 seconds for a new app.
Interesting.
Some neat stuff.
Interesting. I think the only other one that comes to mind is like HashiCorp's got theirs as well. Right?
Nomad,
thank you. Totally skipped my mind. And I've talked to people who've used it before, and like for what they're doing, it had great benefit basically. Yeah. I feel like the Kubernetes approach to me, at least, always seemed like it was batteries not included. Like if you wanted to combine AAs with Ds and like make your own sort of thing
Yeah.
going together, go ahead. But it felt like Nomad is more of like the batteries included kind of. And
Yeah.
maybe D2IQ is kind of in that same boat where they want to give you all the stuff and like an
Yeah.
opinionated release of an orchestrator.
Yeah. There's a podcast I was listening to pretty recently, Kube Cuddle. Do you know that one?
I do not. I've heard of them.
Kube Cuddle, spelled Cuddle.
Right.
And they interviewed Joe Betta.
Nice.
And it was amazing. It was great hearing him talk about all sorts of things. I mean, not only Kubernetes, but also like people are asking him now that he's left VMware. Will he start another startup? Because he started up Heptio. Will there be another startup? And it's not that's not a decision you go take lightly, because starting any startup, it's probably going to be an 8 to 10 year process before you can leave.
Right.
But also talking about what was the state of the world when Kubernetes first came out or was first available, and also what was the state of the world when Docker first came out. And that was a really interesting part of the discussion, because you're saying, well, a lot of people will say, oh, well, we always had jails and we had these other things, and it's like, no, I mean, what Docker did was amazing. I mean, that Docker image was, I mean, it changed the world, and people think that is a small thing, but it's enormous, and it's why big. It is the key reason Kubernetes was able to do what we could do. Kubernetes took it in a very different direction around. It was basically talking about Swarm versus Kubernetes, but then he also was talking about other. What's the differentiator? Why did Kubernetes become successful versus Mesos versus all these other solutions out there? And so it's a really interesting discussion of all those points. So
better t-shirts, right?
Check it out.
Okay. I think it's gotta be.
Yeah, better t-shirts.
You know the answer. Come on.
Yeah.
Better logos, better t-shirts. Yeah.
Yep. One of the things was, when the person came up with the 7-sided helm wheel for a logo, it's because the official Google designers basically said, this is a open source project, so we're not going to really invest our time as designers into it. Well, you just figure it out yourself, and it's not important.
Interesting.
And so that's how they were able to come up with this less advanced kind of logo, which works well. So
yeah, I kind of like it. Simple logos are good. I think something about an understated kind of simple logo.
Yeah.
Good. So I think at this point in time, what they're saying is like, we're evaluating an orchestrator, be it Kubernetes or not. So basically they're saying like users with less than 5 clusters are less likely to be evaluating Kubernetes alternatives. And I think basically what they're saying is that the people who have the need for something other than Kubernetes might be quite advanced, I think is what I kind of gleaned from this, because it looks like the people with the 21 plus clusters, which is a lot, are looking at more tools. Like it seems more predominant that they're looking at more tools. The people in the middle of the rows of the 6 to 20 clusters are probably using like 1 or 2 tools. And then when you look at the people who are like the 1 to 5 clusters, so probably just getting started, they're at like 1 tool or actually maybe no tools. So it's just like they're just using sort of the vanilla distro, and that's enough for them. Which
I don't know. I mean, I think the fact that you're using more clusters means you need more. I mean, you don't need just the tools that you started with the 1 to 5. I mean, 1 to 5, and you're using, K9S or Lens or something like that to just get a look at.
You're just using VS Code, right? Like what's built into your
VS Code, right?
Manager production.
But as
clusters.
soon as you're doing more with lots of clusters, now, I mean, that's a manual. I mean, it's a nice tool, but it's still a manual process, and you need to find other tools to help you automate a lot of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be used to like the one cluster running kubectl locally, like as a
Hmm.
root user, like
Yeah.
they've got the lens or VS Code or what have you. That's like
Yeah.
maybe JetBrains or what have you integrate into their prod environment. They're
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, this virtuous cycle of like build and release is really easy because yeah, they're
Yeah.
YOLOing stuff to prod.
Yeah.
Maybe it's staging, will be charitable, possibly dev, but like they've got a tool that's basically a link to the cluster that they're
Yeah.
just throwing things to it. This totally makes sense to me. But it's like one of those old problems, right? Like the problem that you have with one server is very different than the problem you're going to have with 10 servers. And that
Right.
problem that 100 and 1,000 and 10,000 servers
Right.
is quite a bit different. Like what you'll be
Yeah.
looking at is a completely different level than it is. And,
Yeah.
and it's not even like that you need better tools, is that you need a completely different type of tool to deal with 10
Right.
clusters as opposed to one. K9s is of course like one of my favorite tools, but like it
Yeah.
just it's not great after about 3 clusters. A great tool,
Right.
don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but once you start
Amazing.
having to context switch between multiple clusters as
Yeah.
opposed to namespaces, which I think it handles really well, it's a little bit cumbersome.
Yeah.
No, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I think of, if you're doing manual steps on 3, 4, 5 clusters or more, then just keeping it straight in your head
Yep.
is going to be hard enough. And then you're going to start deploying things to one cluster that shouldn't be on that cluster. And I mean, I've got a talk that goes into why, what's it called? I'm cluster admin, destroy every role that you know. And I start out
Perfect.
with a bunch of examples of here's things that, if they have too much access on all the clusters, that means that they're going to, or on all the machines, they're going to run some bad command on the wrong machine and
Absolutely.
take down things, whether it's the example of GitLab taking down everything for a few days, or
It happens.
Walmart, or all sorts of great examples of people that had too much privilege on the wrong machine and not intentionally bringing everything down, sometimes intentionally, but generally not intentionally. And they bring everything down because they really needed better tools, and they also needed to have not that much access.
Also true, yeah. Sometimes it's good to have to go through hoops to do certain things.
Yeah.
All right, and then I think we're about halfway through at this point, so I think we're a third through the last one. So I think there's a couple in here which were maybe less interesting to me. I don't know about you, but it was like, which of the following combinations of data center and cloud architectures does your organization use? So like basically, are you public and private cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, that kind of thing?
Right.
Again, this kind of track to me. It's like, listen,
Yeah.
if you're in a big company, you're probably going to have more than one cloud. Kind of
Right.
makes sense. These seem pretty standard to me. I thought that private cloud only was a little bit bigger than I had expected. I'm not sure what we're calling private cloud these days. Is it VMware? Is it Hyper-V? I don't know. But that was the only big surprise for me.
God, what was
Proxmox? I've seen Proxmox out there, KVM, TrueNAS.
No. A much bigger one that I mean, in order to even get started with it, you're paying them an enormous amount of money.
Tanzu? Pivotal?
No,
Cloud
bigger.
Foundry?
Cloud Foundry, yes.
Cloud Foundry, okay, which I think is now Tanzu. I mean, it's different,
Yeah.
but I think that they've kind of rolled into VMware Tanzu.
Yeah.
But yeah, my understanding is you have to like have an engagement with them prior to getting it. Like I've tried to get a trial, for example, to set up a home lab, but like no.
Yeah.
Wrong, or like if you have to ask kind of thing. And like I'm sure they can do something on the pricing, but Tanzu does look quite large, and it doesn't look like it'd be easy. But I think they are built as like a private cloud, basically. Or like a run anywhere.
And that Tanzu is what was Heptio, or parts of. I mean, Heptio became parts of Tanzu, I think.
Yeah, became part of Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Sorry, I said Cloud Foundry, but I meant to say Cloud Foundry. I got rolled into what is now Tanzu. This is my knowledge.
Okay, yeah.
not Cloud Foundry though. That's a whole other thing.
Wait, Cloud what?
Cloud Foundry.
Cloud Foundry.
This is what happens when watching the Australian podcast where they're just making jokes all the time.
Oh, you're still watching Tony and
I'm still watching
whatever?
Tony and Ryan. Yeah, this is my bad.
So after last week, I started watching a bit of them, and I found many of them very funny, and I showed my wife really that first one that is the TikTok
sort of clip, yeah.
and um, and she was laughing really hard at some of them. And at the end says, "That wasn't funny. I don't like it." Like, what? I saw you laughing.
The bar is quite a bit higher.
Yeah. So
Interesting. Yeah, no, I don't know. The humor is pretty good. I think some
yeah.
people just react to funny things in a way
Yeah.
that makes me laugh at them and find it funnier as well. I don't know. All right, so we're in the home stretch here.
Okay.
So the next one is like,
Yeah.
if your organization uses Kubernetes, how many production clusters do you have? So, and this is kind of to that last question. So if you're in the like private cloud, chances are you've got quite a few clusters, is what they're saying. What's interesting is that there's a split. So it's private cloud with like 1 cluster to 5, I think is what it is. Yeah, 1 to 5. And then there's quite a bit in the 10 clusters. So it's you're either like small and using a bit, or you're quite large. And then if you go all the way back to like hybrid cloud, it changes quite a bit. So there's more people in hybrid cloud with a lot of clusters, but also we know that those are the enterprise users for the most part. And then as we scale back a little bit, so we're back down to like multi-cloud but not hybrid, it's kind of a wash. It looks like it's kind of all over the place. But what's interesting to me is that in the public cloud only, the majority of people have fewer clusters, which makes me think that they're getting like the EKS, the AKS, or the GKE, and they're just getting started with smaller clusters, which is kind of like that's that nascent kind of maybe, I don't know if they're early adopters or adopters at this point in time. I don't think they're late. But the people who are just getting into Kubernetes, getting into Kubernetes on public cloud is definitely the majority.
Yeah,
as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I wasn't too excited about that one.
Same here.
Okay, it's interesting.
And then we get like a bit of a, we'll call this an opinion, but Kubernetes is emerging as the operating system of the cloud. I've heard this before. This is not alone. Bring it up here, but I think the goal is to think about, if we're going to be deploying software, what does it look like? Like, where do we deploy to? And I think, what's the old adage? Like, you don't get fired for hiring IBM. I think this used to be like Red Hat was the answer.
Yeah.
Maybe Ubuntu is like one of those two, or possibly some Debian vanilla is what we're using as like the operating system that ran most of your servers. And I don't think they're wrong, but I think people are like, there's an appetite similar to Docker to have like one place to deploy, regardless of what cloud I'm on, regardless of what I'm doing.
Right.
Whether or not it's the operating system of the cloud is like maybe a bit far-fetched, but I think I get what they're getting at. Like, they want one platform to deploy to. That's similar across all clouds, hybrid, on-prem, what have you. And yeah, sure, I'll give you a point.
But one thing I often see pop up, for there'll be one voice every now and then, which is like the voice of reason that pops up and manages to pop his head out. And then
is it Hightower?
Under.
This feels like one of those Hightower things.
Well, the person who says Kubernetes is not right for everyone. Just because it is the cool thing, but there's a lot of people where it is the wrong thing. I mean, if you've got a bunch of developers and not an ops person to, maybe you're a small company, a young company, you're not building tools that are for Kubernetes, and you're having to force Kubernetes on yourself because it's the thing to do, may not be the right thing, because you just don't have the manpower. And if you don't have the people who are thinking about this all the time, you're going to do it wrong.
Right. Yeah, having the skills in-house to manage Kubernetes is like that. It's one of those maybe risks, I guess, as you're trying to adopt like if you're trying to adopt a new operating system, if we're going to call it that, like, you have to have people skilled in that operating system. You're not going to move from like Windows to Linux as a whole without having some expertise on either or. Even if you're going from Linux to Windows, for example, same thing. You have to have a fair amount of expertise in that operating system to know that you can operate it in production. It's a pretty big step. So yeah, I would 100% agree there. And then I think that the main chart here, and we've used yet another type of chart. I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but we've gone through a few different types. This is one of my kind of favorites. It's maybe not the easiest to look at, but it's kind of like to describe it, because this is a very visual medium. So basically, it's half a donut. So if a donut is like a pie chart with a hole in it, this is half of that. It looks like a speed gauge. We're not measuring speed, we're measuring percentages, which is why, although it looks exciting, I'm not sure it's the best at conveying info. However, to their credit, there's only 2 numbers, so it's not that hard to tell like where it lies on the slide. But yeah, this was an interesting choice for this chart. Is what I was thinking when I scrolled through this.
The whole the other thing I hate about this chart is the way that
I
on
didn't
the right
say I
side.
hated it. Interesting choice.
Okay, so piling on to your hatred of this chart. No, on the right side, auxiliary workloads. Why do they have to cross lines? They could have moved.
I don't know. I that also stuck out to me, and I was trying not to be nitpicky, but like, yes, why did you do this? And how is it 211%, and then the other one is like 30%? Just, I have thoughts. I think what we're trying to say, like the conclusions there, is that like basically there's a lot of auxiliary workloads that's far outpaced the application workloads. However, I feel like we could have represented this a little bit better than we currently do.
Yeah,
you're still puzzling through it, right? Like
I am. Yeah, I mean, the numbers don't. The numbers seem. All of the numbers seem to be completely exclusive of each other.
Yeah. So what's rate of change is what they're saying. So like they went from 41% to 63%, and then calculated the rate of change. So it's like a delta, basically. I don't know if a delta sign would have helped, maybe even more confused. And then the other side is like from 2021 to 2022. It's grown by 30% somehow.
Sure.
But it went from 59 to 37.
Yeah, whatever.
I think what we're saying is that like the percentage mix is different than the actual number. It's got to be how we got here, but
yeah,
it's growth year over year is what we're measuring with the bubble up numbers, and then the mix is what we measure below, because those do add up, like the 37 and 63 and the 59 and 41. Being that half a circle is 100%.
Sure. Yeah, let's go with that.
This is one of the few charts in this that I had some reservations.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed the number of. I mean, most of them are bars, basically with people as bars and just scalar values, and then there's
pie
that.
Charts. Yep. I think this.
Are there other pie charts?
Yep, there are.
Oh yeah. There's a pie charts for architecture
and some people charts, like some infographics kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then we get a quick quote from Dynatrace. Again, this is like we're trying to be unbiased here. So basically, they're saying like any software project that they use Kubernetes for. And I feel like as a tech company, clients expect, and they're saying it's a build pipeline for their SaaS offerings. Definitely, like if you talk to a software vendor that you kind of have like a big investment in, you'd expect them to be working on or somehow around Kubernetes, or at the very least, like exploring it, if not using it, because it does feel like it's an indicator of maturity at some level for a SaaS company. Again, like this is within sort of like that startup realm,
right?
But I feel like we do equate the adoption of Kubernetes with startup maturity, unfortunately.
Yeah,
it's just kind of where we are, and I think this is kind of what the whole report's trying to say is like it's a mainstream adoption, and it has been for a bit. Where are we at this point in time? And then it jumps into just talking about some CNCF projects. So we talked about Argo earlier, OpenTelemetry is in here, which of course Datadog supports, Containerd, Core DNS, sort of those building blocks basically. Core DNS I think has been around for a while, but like before Kubernetes, I don't think anyone was putting this type of pressure on it. Same thing for Argo. I think Argo and Tecton were kind of like just sort of in their infancy prior to all of this, and the need for that kind of stuff grew as GitOps became more of a mainstream practice.
Right.
And because of that, it sort of pushed everything along. Same thing for Containerd, much to the chagrin of Docker, what we used to say like a Docker container. I think people try to maybe distance themselves from Docker as a company, unfortunately. And then we're just talking about some projects in question. So if we're looking at like OPA, Linkerd, OpenTelemetry, Core DNS, Argo, Containerd, this is I know it's a little bit hard to read, right? So like
it is hard to read because I was thinking because of the way that they've got these the vertical axis meant something, but it doesn't. It's purely, it's going vertically just so you can see all the
Just so you
boxes.
can
It's
nest it.
just a visual thing.
You
Um,
get it. Yeah, and once you
it's
get
not
down to
like,
Linkerd and
yeah,
OPA is how you can tell. This is
yeah,
the way to read the chart. But yeah, when you just read Argo and Container D, it's a little bit confusing to see where they are.
yeah,
Also, the length of the lines actually does matter. I feel like they are
yeah.
proportional to each other, which is also a little bit confusing because they're not all in a line. They're in two different vertical rows, so it's a little bit hard to compare them all.
Yeah.
So I feel like
And
if you
so
want to
Linkerd
compare
D
them
being
exactly,
less this year than, or last year versus the year before, in mind share is what's the number actually measuring?
so it's the question is your organization using in production or
Okay,
evaluating any of these projects? So there's less
right.
people evaluating Linkerd and OPA than
And
previously.
Linkerd D is by Buoyant, which is one of the 3 providers of information to this survey.
That's right. So they
Right.
probably know what's going on. On top of which,
Yes.
Linkerd, I think that the way the service mesh works, and I don't know how it reports back, like you probably know what else is in the cluster because the
Right.
service mesh gets in there and it knows
Yeah.
about everything that's going on. It's
Yeah.
kind of how it works, at the very least in the namespace. All right, so that one's basically to me that's saying like if you were going to think of the projects in the CNCF, the ones that are like graduated and popular and kind of like mainstream, for me, Container D as being like the container runtime that most people use. I think most people would
Mhm.
agree. That's kind of it. Same thing when you're thinking about DNS within a Kubernetes cluster, you could use a
Right.
third-party provider, maybe your cloud providers or something like that. But generally, inside of the cluster, people use something local that will then like have a
Mhm.
forwarder or something like that. And as far as I can tell, Core DNS is kind of the de facto here.
Yeah.
And then we get into like the less stuff. So like the policy agent, service mesh. I still don't think the dust is settled here. There's a lot going
Yeah.
on in this field.
Yeah.
I realize that Istio is kind of it's no longer like a hot button topic or anything like that. It's kind of settled down, but I
Mhm.
still do feel like there's a bit of back and forth going on between these projects.
Yep.
And then we get into like open telemetry, whether or not people want to adopt an open standard that can hit like multiple locations, or maybe so they can have vendor neutrality or what have you. It's in there, and people are still like evaluating or using a prod, but not as much as something like Core DNS, Container D, that kind of thing.
Right.
So it's very much still on the chopping block, or still a decision to be made. All right, we're almost there. So now it gets a little bit longer. We get kind of verbose here, but this is honestly this chart. I feel like I don't know. Maybe I'm misreading this, but it's less interesting to me. But all of this to say that mutual TLS is a big benefit, and that because it's a big benefit, they think Linkerd adoption is being pushed, and the sort of the tenant or the practice behind this is zero trust. And I think that was like a boring paper. Maybe not boring. Sorry, Alphabet paper from boring the company Alphabet.
Okay.
From way back then, just about. I'm trying to think of the company. It's not Alphabet. It was like one of those sub. That's what I was thinking about boring. Boring being like Tesla's kind of thing.
Boring. Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't a boring. It was a scintillating paper about zero trust. It's sort of like something that Google was starting to adopt. That must have been almost 10 years ago at this point in time. Like zero trust, the paper has been around for a while. In terms of adoption, I think it's taken a while just to get people to use MFA, at the very least to like 2FA kind of a thing, let alone encrypting all traffic inside of a cluster. Outside of a cluster, I mean, it's hopefully outside. Inside, I think, is where people are starting to adopt the service meshes to do this stuff. And then they talk about that it's the normalized count of unique Linkerd enabled clusters in the full open source community. And basically they're saying that anything younger than 30 days they don't include, which is fine. Those are probably test clusters, that kind of stuff. I think that totally makes sense. All right. And then we get into some of the observability stuff. I'll let you read this section here so that I don't put too much color into it, because I've got strong opinions here, but I'll try to make sure that they're loosely held. As a former Dynatrace user, I will preface this with.
You want me to talk about it?
Yes.
You want me to...
Grab the hot potato.
So, let me remind myself of what this was.
Yeah, no worries. I could probably just read it for you too.
Well, I mean, I don't want to just read.
What do you think I've been doing?
So this is looking at a number of areas: monitoring, database, messaging, CI/CD, big data, security, and service mesh. And I think how much people are using these tools last year versus the year before. It's interesting that it's just open source monitoring, but then all databases, all messaging, all CI/CD. It's interesting they call out monitoring as specifically the open source pieces of monitoring.
First point of contention. Thank you.
So I don't know, is open source implied in the rest of those, or is it just the open source monitoring?
I will say I'm unfamiliar with the report that they're quoting, so like maybe the right thing would be to read it. But you're right. I was kind of thinking, like, when I look at databases, I assume there's going to be some open source databases. When I look at CI/CD, same sort of thing. When I look at big data, security maybe a little less so, but service mesh again, like, where are you buying the enterprise service mesh? I mean, maybe you are, but I have a feeling that most of the stuff in larger orders.
Although, I mean, it's Dynatrace's data, and Dynatrace is a non-open source monitoring tool like a Datadog is. So, everything's growing. Is the summary. It's like, thankfully, more and more people. I mean, it's up to 77% are doing some sort of monitoring, which is good.
Right.
All the rest, that's there too.
And it's hard for me, and this is when I maybe put on the pundit hat, but it's hard for me to say, like, how many new clients did you have in the past year? What was that rate of increase? And based on that, what do these numbers look like compared to it? I guess is my question. I would assume that they're selling more. Like, Dynatrace, the company, is a good product. I've used it. Again, no problem. I would assume they're selling more, and because they're selling more, they're getting more clients, and because of that, monitoring is going up across the board. It seems pretty easy. What I'd like to know is the increase in sales versus the increase in monitoring. Like, is it companies that you've got that have really realized that they've got a whole bunch of blind spots that they now need to monitor? Maybe. Are they using new tools and that they've got to roll in monitoring with that? Maybe. Is it new clients? Is it a mix of the above? That kind of thing would be interesting to see. Again, I haven't seen the report, so I can't say.
Yeah.
But when I look at things like database, like, you're probably using MariaDB, Postgres, MySQL, what have you, for your database. I mean, there are enterprise databases out there that you pay for. Oracle and MS SQL are certainly out there. But I do wonder, well, what percentage of all of these is open source, as opposed to the call out of open source monitoring, and whether or not they're included or not. So many questions.
Yeah, and across all categories, open source projects rank among the most frequently used solutions.
Yeah.
That's
so I split
among the most. Like, is it the most, or is it not the most?
I would assume it's the most. Like, let's be honest. Like, ignoring the open source brouhaha and like wanting to feel good and contribute back. People like free stuff. Like, open source is rampant in the startup community for a reason. Like, you're able to help direct the project that you're using, at the same time getting it for not free, but like, honestly, at a much lesser cost than something out there. So I get the drive to open source.
You said something there, and you kind of glossed over it.
Sorry.
Open source. Everybody likes free because it's open source, but not open source. It does not mean free.
Exactly. I'm glad you understand.
And not just. It doesn't mean free in that there's human costs. Okay, sure, there's those, but there are open source products where, in order to get it, you have to pay money to get to even use the product.
Right.
Like, I mean, I'm thinking of like the
open core licensing is like a common example. I don't need to name names, but like, there's where in order to use it to its fullest features, you end up.
Well, no, I mean, there was an LMS, a learning management system, that we were using at Datadog.
Yeah, I'll name names. I've used it before.
Okay. And they said it's open source, but in order to get the source, you need to sign the NDA that allows you to download the source. But in order to sign the NDA, you already have to be a paying customer.
Yeah, I guess I was being a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah.
Let's say I was trying to be a bit charitable, but it really depends on the license. As a former Alfresco
Mhm.
licensee as well, like it really depends on the license of the software that you're
Yeah.
using. And in some cases, it's listen, I get it. People want to make money at the end of the day, but
Yeah.
I do see when I talk to people about software that you're using, that the prevalence is open source for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to put. I didn't want to like get the open source people all up in the chat. It
Yeah.
looks like the comments are like. Well, we'll have to watch for the YouTube comments later. But like,
The
I don't want to
comments are
rile
quiet.
anybody
We haven't even gotten the standard comment, the one
No, good day.
comment from your mother yet.
Yeah, exactly. I think we scared her away last time talking about all the tech stuff.
No.
Okay, so for the next one is basically technology adoption is much greater than previously thought. I think the last 3 years have kind of like pushed people to think about new ways of doing things, and because of that, the rate of adoption of tech has been higher in the last 3 years than usual. That is my assumption. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but like the move to work from home made people think about things a little bit differently, and because of that, I feel like maybe this isn't going to be true for the next 2 years, but let's see. Maybe it will
I
continue
don't
on
know. I
about.
mean, it's getting bigger it's bigger this year than it was last year, and it was
Right?
bigger last year than it was the year before.
Yep.
And you could say that about every year since technology, since
tech
farming
is
was
coming around.
discovered.
Exactly. It's always increasing, right? So the question is the
Yeah.
rate of change year over year much different during these past 3 years than it was before?
Yeah.
I think it has. But you're right. I don't think it's going to slow to like negative numbers.
No.
Like next year, we're not going to start clawing tech back and saying, no. Like
Right.
all this tech stuff is not a good idea. I feel like it will still increase. The question is, will that rate of change, is it hockey stick graph or is it just a little bit of a plateau?
But then it's anytime you're measuring like this rate of change about a hard to define, there's hard to define units. I mean, 1% is, well, I mean, it could be just a variation. What we think of a variation of Kubernetes today could be a very different, and that is a 30% change or 50% change.
Not to
But
take the
with a
wind out of your
different set
sails.
of glasses, it's a 1% change.
Yeah, not to like deflate your whole argument here. They do say what they're actually talking about next. It's just like this title, I think maybe a little bit too generic, because what we're actually talking about is service mesh, serverless, and service proxies. And listen, service mesh and service proxies are split out here. In some cases, they may be included in your service mesh. So we'll put those together, even though I realize we set them out. And then there's like serverless. So there's the reason I want to separate them out is because there's a massive trend behind serverless, and I get why it's in the report, and I understand that like some of the data that some company may have given them is like around this, so it totally makes sense to me. However, on the service mesh side, I don't know. When I talk to people, they're like, we put in a service mesh and then we ripped it out and we tried another one and then we ripped that out. I've heard this story so many times. And then like a year later, like, I've gone back to the one I started with just to try it out again. Because I do need some of these features. It's just like, it's a really big hammer and I don't need all of the features it comes with. So I feel like this is where a lot of the work still has yet to come, basically. So when we're talking about like the Linkerd, the STOs, or what have you, that's where I feel like this is still not necessarily there. And they often come with a service proxy. However, there are different service proxies out there that are sort of competing for some of that pie for just like a feature that's part of the service mesh. So I guess basically we're going to have to see like another year or another year or two to figure out what's happening here, because this is still ongoing.
Yeah.
And then we get into your favorite
serverless thing being in here.
Yeah, I know. So tech adoption of serverless, I think, is through the roof for tons of reasons.
Sure.
But like, it seems like once you've tried it for certain things, it seems like an obvious choice.
It's wonderful. Yes.
Right.
But to claim that Knative is serverless, I think is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, some would argue, like, since we're being pedantic today, some would argue that the name serverless.
Well, I think it's
especially when you're talking about
because
when you're talking about Knative, is like, how many servers do you need to deploy Knative in order?
You need servers to deploy Knative. You don't need servers to deploy.
Yeah, it's not just one server either. You need quite a few.
Right. And you don't need servers to deploy on Lambda. I don't have to know anything
Well,
about any servers. They
I
they
mean,
don't
there are
exist as far
servers.
as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
No, they're
exactly.
not. I
But
don't
if
have
you
to
talk
deal
to,
with them.
yeah, if you talk to like a Cloudflare or something like that, and they're doing like what
Yeah,
they call them workers, if they're doing workers, they'll tell you that like no, they're not servers. Maybe they're networking appliances, right? Like
yeah,
we don't know what they're
yeah,
running on. I mean, they're probably servers, but like
yeah.
that serverless kind of TM versus serverless itself, or serverless as a practice, a little bit different.
TM.
Yeah, serverless the framework as opposed to serverless the practice,
Oh, okay.
right?
I was
Because
thinking
there
you
is
were talking about like transcendental meditation for some reason.
no. What kind of recommendations do you have today?
No,
I
isn't
think it's
that
TM. I
transcendental
just don't know.
meditation? That's the one where you have to pay a lot of money and they give you the word to focus on.
Oh, I thought you were gonna start talking about ayahuasca or something.
No,
You
no,
pay them a
no.
lot of money and they give you a bucket. Sorry, we've
Give you an
devolved. I've
experience.
never done ayahuasca.
I don't know anything about this stuff.
Then we
I
get into
just,
WASM.
everything I
And
know I
ASM.
learned from Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, exactly. Then we get into like the WebAssembly kind of stuff, which honestly I don't have a lot of domain knowledge around. I can straight up like I'll gobble up these numbers. I'll believe them. We've got a couple half-done
So
charts, but they're not nested.
there is a article I saw, I think today, maybe
Right.
it was yesterday. It might have been on like Hacker News or one of these, talking about WebAssembly as being, well, this is the technology that we need to avoid vendor lock-in.
Okay.
And of course, you see that
I can buy that angle.
every year there's a new technology. Wow, this allows us to get rid of vendor lock-in, and then it's 6 months of use. Like, oh well, we're locked into our vendor.
Yeah,
And
and
so
like
I'm
the
sure
vendor in question here is like
WebAssembly
what?
for now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
WebAssembly running in what? Like Chromium?
yeah,
Probably
yeah,
is what they're talking about. I think that's where the lock-in is. Like what
yeah.
browser you're using. I think they're so we've got Safari. Let's be nice. We've got Firefox, and then we've got Chrome. Basically, those are the three. Chrome has a bunch of different flavors, but like honestly, when we're talking about WebAssembly, it should make it so that you're not stuck to a
Yeah.
browser and not
And isn't
necessarily
Safari Chrome?
It is not. Safari is
Wasn't
WebKit.
it?
WebKit.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And Chrome is its I should know, but Chromium is basically the thing is V8, I believe, is the big engine behind it.
V8, yeah.
Oh, there we go. We did get a comment from Drift 50. So proud. Yes. We are arguing about chart types today. How far we've come. And then listen, so these numbers are pretty straightforward. So basically it's like, are you doing any WebAssembly or are you thinking about it? And then when you look at like, these are basically just two numbers combined, I think.
Call your father.
This is perfect. So the question is, should I call my dad about WebAssembly?
Is that a comment to you specifically, Ryan, or is that to all viewers?
It's probably good advice.
Is that for everyone to call?
So for everyone else on the stream, call your parents if you got them. Definitely keep in touch. All right, and I will. Yes, thank you for the reminder. Okay, next up we got the mix of end users versus non-end users. So these are CNCF end users, and what we find, of course, is that the CNCF end users tend to be more interested in WebAssembly. And then if it's organizational personal, it seems to be around the same clip. On the non-end user side, it looks like more people are looking at it for organizational reasons and less on the personal side. I think that's pretty straightforward. All right, and then now it's just knowledge about runtime. So like which one you're using. Oh no, more chats. Oh jeez. We don't need to read all of this. There were some comments.
Have you been eating well? Have you been going potty enough? You need more bran in your diet. I think that kind of comment could get us get us in trouble. I think isn't that I don't know. It wasn't us saying it.
Exactly. We were just reading
comments. One of Ryan's many fans.
One of one many fans. All right, let's try to stay on track. We're almost done. We're so close. Okay. So just before we get to security, basically we're talking about runtime. So which one of these is more popular?
This is such a silly question. Which ones have you heard of?
Yeah, this is a pulse check. Like, hey, something's coming out. We don't know which is going to take the lead. Which have you heard of? WASM Edge seems to have a marginal lead here compared to Wemmer, which is WebAssembly micro runtime, and Wasmer. It was,
Yeah.
there's honestly not a lot
Really
between them. We're talking 40, 51, 53%.
Yeah.
Not that much.
And lovely quote. Okay, so challenges when using CNCF projects in production. The tool becomes, or the project becomes inactive. There's security vulnerabilities, there's lack of documentation, and there's code bugs, and they all seem to be about the same level, but it's only like a third. But a third. I mean, that's challenges. A third of the projects that they use become inactive, and a third have security vulnerabilities, and a third have lack of documentation, and a third have code bugs. Oh,
right. And then, of course, so the counterpoint here from Chris Anishek, who is the CTO over at CNCF, he's saying that basically adopting Sendos projects is a bit riskier than graduated ones,
yeah.
and this is reflected in CNCF's project maturity process. Graduated projects are very safe to bet on, which I think so. Based on our experience, if we look at like what's graduated and what's not, totally makes sense. And then we talk about like the challenges of using CNCF stuff in prod. I don't think this is sort of relevant, I think, to the CNCF crowd. Maybe not so much outside of the crowd, but I think if you're new to what the CNCF has in terms of projects and how it works, I think if you're risk averse, you might want to know that these projects are things that people are using, absolutely, are stable in the graduated sense, and will stick around. Like, absolutely. I think at this point in time, it's been multiple years, we can say so. Oh man, this got stopped. The peanut gallery is just on fire today.
Oh, wow.
I think basically the just to boil this one down is I should wear more colors. Yes.
Yeah. I got red on me, so that's good.
I normally wear so yeah, I'll do my best.
Yeah, I mean, but this is a challenge with any software that you use. You have no idea if the company that's backing whatever product is going to become inactive. They run out of money.
You say this, but have you ever been part of an RFP where like you ask for financials essentially from the company that you're dealing with for a startup? I don't know if you've got clients who do the same, but like when it's open source, people they don't have like the same sort of relationship with the software company that they're used to, and because of that, it feels like the due diligence is a little bit, I don't know, more severe in my opinion than it is with like commercial software. But I guess I'm an open source apologist at this point. But like I do feel like trying to figure out the maturity level of an open source project without necessarily wanting to help is what kind of rubs me the wrong way. So like I want to get something for free and I want to make sure it's stable, but I don't want to help make sure it's stable. It's like one of those uniquely kind of enterprisey sort of attitudes. Again, I'm fully biased here. I'm sorry, because I only see this in enterprise. Whereas when you're working for a startup and you're picking it up, it's like, oh, that's okay. We can get in there and fix it. This code base we're familiar with. We're happy getting our hands dirty. We're forking it if we have to, just to make sure we can keep using it. But this is a great head start. We're not going to spend 10 years trying to get here. It's already there. Let's take it around with it. Kind of thing. So yeah, like I understand that these questions seem a little bit odd, but I think if you put on the enterprise glasses for a bit, it's not.
No, I don't think it seems odd, but I mean, you're going to take on this risk no matter what the software is that you
absolutely.
And like you look at the financial statements from a company, it could be like
past performance, future performance. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could take a look at that, and I know I'm going to, for my personal use, I want to get all the financial information about this company. I'm going to be using a product that's supported by a major company, Google. Is this major company, so I'm going to start using Google Reader.
I was about to say Reader. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to build my whole business on the Reader API.
Yeah. and then it disappears. But I remember when I was at Microsoft, and I was hired at Microsoft to do Linux Compete. How do we destroy Linux? And I remember one of the arguments. There was an early a product that I was using personally, and it was one developer writing this thing, and it was amazing. I can't remember what it was, but I seem to remember it was really great. And then the person posted on a public forum, sorry, I got a girlfriend. I'm gonna be doing a little bit less of this now, and I'm
Right.
focused more on her, which is great. I mean, all good things, but I mean, who knows what? I mean, that's one example of a single
Right.
person project, but it could be a larger project, and the company has to pivot in a different direction, or they've just run out of money, or they have one massive security problem that kills them, they just can't come out of
Or they
the
increase
press from
prices,
that.
or
Or increase
it's
prices.
no
Yeah,
longer available in your region. They got bought out by
yeah.
somebody else, and they've canceled the project.
There's so
All
many
these things,
reasons that, I mean, software products disappear.
unfortunately.
And maybe that's less. Maybe there's with open source, there's an ability for a company to take that on, but uh, maybe not. I mean, I think of so many times we would prefer to. I mean, and I did. I prefer to buy something to do
Right.
that rather than us doing it ourselves, because we
Right.
don't want to be in the business of maintaining this piece
Right.
of
If it's
software.
not a core competency, right? Like, let's
Yeah,
say it's written in a language that you don't necessarily have the
yeah.
skills for in-house. Yeah. That totally
How
makes
many
sense.
times did Kirk want to take on building a new
Learning
what is it,
platform
a
or what
new
have you.
serverless platform, or a new Katacoda, replace Katacoda? Yeah, we don't want
But
to be in the
honestly,
business
like,
of
the
that.
developer is going to develop, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's what you
yeah,
want to do. You want to make the new thing,
yeah,
and not built here is certainly something quite common in the industry as well. Like,
yeah.
if I can't find it and it doesn't fit all my needs, then I'll just build my own kind of thing. It happens. I
I
know.
missed this last message from your
I
mom.
know. Yes, yes. Think of
Did
my
she really fall
grandmother.
down the stairs?
She did. She's passed away since,
Oh no.
unfortunately. But yes, I'm not sure why this is brought up. But thank you for your blessings. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It ended on a
Um,
sad night. So now, on that positive note, we're into security. So the next question is, like, how many of you have fully implemented security/compliance activities by GitOps maturity? So first side of this question is like security, 100%, never going to happen. Second side is driven by GitOps maturity. And like, again, I feel like that's a bit of a moving target, but at least a little bit more easy to pin down than saying you're completely secure, which is like, I'm not going to say it's a fool's errand. Obviously, you want to be as secure as possible, but it does feel like
right.
those goalposts are moving all the time, whereas GitOps seems to be like a defined practice.
And we established earlier on that GitOps was not used by a huge number.
That's right.
So
So
I mean,
of that, like 50%. Yep.
right. Then it's the smaller percent. Yeah.
Right. And then we're just looking through. So is it their software development process? Is it codified policies? Is it codified policies for dynamically associated with identity? So like more of the AAA, the authentication authorization. There's one more A, isn't there? Authentication authorization feels like one of those things that you should know.
Wait, which
Sorry.
one?
AAA. Authentication.
Automobile Association?
Authorization.
American?
Yes, American. It's got to be American. Then the other one here is open source program office. So in terms of like
I don't
having,
even know what that means. Open source program office?
so department of your company that thinks about licenses specifically, and like the software that you're using, or
Jeremy.
Yeah, exactly. Linuxquestions.com. Next question. Then the next is consuming SBOM, which I still don't think has been defined, but we'll say it's software bill of materials. So all the dependencies that your software has off the chain, and then it's content to identify compliance and security issues. So it's basically like for each of these areas, how mature are you in the basically like GitOps processes for security of these areas. So the biggest one, just to make it a little bit easier, is like nearly all, so 57% of the deployment practices adhere to GitOps principles for security policies for software development. And this could be down to like ports. So like let's keep it like an easy win. So this baseline is pretty simple.
Yeah.
Now they say addresses open source software. There could be a little bit more to it than there, so maybe we're doing some fuzzing or something like that. But I'd assume it's down to like understanding the ins and outs of a piece of software and making sure that you can deploy it securely. 57% say that nearly all of their deployment practices and tools adhere to GitOps principles. And we'll be charitable and say that, like, yeah, no problem.
I feel that this is, I mean, I would imagine this question is showing up at the end of the report. I would imagine this question also showed up at the end of the actual survey, or some of the information that was put together on this. And I wonder if by the end of this survey, people was like, what is the last? Okay, fine, randomly choose things. I'm getting so tired of this. No, maybe not. Maybe that's just me. If I had gotten the survey, I'd be randomly choosing numbers
You just ran out of
because I'm
steam
so
at this
tired.
point in time, so
Yeah,
you like
yeah,
invalidate the second part of it.
whatever.
Yeah, so I guess at this point in time, what were we thinking about? It's like the goodwill of the survey responder,
Yeah,
and where in the survey this question landed at. But I feel like you're right. It's probably towards the end. We can look at the CSVs to figure out what
yeah,
the ordering was. Just ranking these from top to bottom. So it's like security for all of your software, and then it's policies for Git and DevOps processes, which is like
yep,
probably GitOps. Like you're doing the GitOps for GitOps. Okay.
yeah,
The next is then it's like for your AAA. So your users, your groups, that kind of stuff. Is that
sure,
defining GitOps? Sure. And then we're down to open source program office. Again, an easy lift here would be like, are you checking your licenses that you're
right,
putting into the software that you're deploying to make sure that like we're not mixing licenses? Which is like,
yeah,
again, it's like one of those maturity levels, but I feel like this is like
yeah.
year one, maybe month 6. Like, oh yeah, right,
And I think,
licenses are important.
yeah, I think I mentioned in the last time was one of the neat plugins or extensions for Docker was the license. I
Yes,
think it's part of Trivia, showing all the licenses that are in a project, and it's
yes.
shocking how many licenses are involved with a lot of these things, especially if you're just grabbing an image off a hub.
Definitely. And if you're pushing software out that's commercially available, like just making sure that
Yeah,
you've like attribution can be a
yeah,
thing. Like you've got to let a product manager, sorry, know in the about page, actually, we need to have a licensing thing. And here's why. And they're like, why? I'm like, I'm about to ship. Why do I need to put but this doesn't make any sense. You're gonna delay the release. And it's like, no, like we actually have to. It's like being able to show people these numbers is pretty important, but getting to that problem might take a bit to understand like why you need to understand your licenses. And again, I'm picking one little thing out of the open source
yeah,
program office, but chances are it's the first thing that's going to come up. And then the last one, and this I think is non-trivial to fix actually, is like making sure that your SBOM content is compliant for security issues is quite difficult. And by this I mean, so if you're using like from Debian in your release, or maybe it's from Arch if you're feeling cool, or perhaps it's from scratch, understanding what your dependencies are. So from scratch doesn't have any. I mean, it's got
hmm
some depending on the container runtime that
yeah,
you're using, but we'll leave that there. And just understanding all of the issues that you've got that could
right,
possibly come from other packages that you don't touch at all. And then the
yeah,
question is, do I start mirroring these packages, which is again non-trivial? Do I start auditing these packages? Like
hmm
you can probably pay someone to help you do that. Or what do I figure out? Do I start like jettisoning off? Because it's very complicated. When you look at
yeah,
your little piece of piecemeal code that you push off to Lambda to run, understanding like all of the code that it rests on, because we sit on top of like a whole bunch of stuff,
yeah,
right? Image Magic's probably sitting there at the bottom. Right? We're talking about
yeah,
those one pieces of software that like everything runs on. But understanding your entire SBOM is actually non-trivial, and it does not
yeah.
surprise me that this is like the very last one. Like nobody's mature. I think the top is 35%.
Yeah, and I'm sure some people think that they have a good handle on it
Also
and
true.
don't,
Also true.
and don't know how bad it might be. I mean, it's so. I mean, yeah, the example of your Docker file that you talked about. I mean, that who knows all the layers. I mean, yeah, you may have tweaked that last layer, but all the layers above it. I mean, where did it come from? And are you building that Docker file yourself, as you said, or are you relying on some other tool, whether it's Copilot or even Chat GPT to generate the
Right.
Docker file for you? And do you really I mean, oh my God. Yeah.
It's difficult. Now, so a little bit further on, like past this graph, they actually do point to some of the security projects within CNCF that can help. So we talked a little bit about Joe Beta. I think Chris Nova used to be there with Joe at VMware, and then joined Falco for a bit. Falco's in here, for example. In Toto is in
hmm
here. Notary's in here, OPA's in here. Tough, who I think one of the core contributors actually works at Datadog, is in here as well. There are other projects out there to help you with this. So I do feel like this space is, again, like the SBOM kind of concerns, supply chain attacks basically is probably another term for this, are becoming more and more prevalent where people are starting to think of it.
Yeah.
Even if it's just like something political, like an _JS or something like that comes around and people pull it, and it causes like a house of cards to come down. I think it's become more and more of a concern for companies. They're starting to look for solutions. So that took a minute, but we're basically done this report. So sorry it took 2 episodes and we went long for both, but I felt like it was a good exercise to go through it all. And I did learn a lot. Like these are good reports. Hopefully our audience of more than one got something out of this, but I do like this content quite a bit.
Thinking of the security projects at the time that it was fielded, I just learned about a new one today. I hadn't heard of, called Bearer.
Like a bearer?
Bearer. Yeah. Bearer.com. Looks pretty cool. Basically an open source Sneak or other tools. Looks pretty cool.
Neat. I like it. I will add that to the show notes. But yeah, I feel like this space, like watch the space. This SBOM security thing is going to become more and more serious. I think SolarWinds is specifically the one that a lot of people point to when they think about supply chain security, unfortunately.
Right. As the what can happen if you don't think about it, right?
Yeah.
Or not even don't think about it, but
cautionary tale.
Yeah,
absolutely. Whew, that was a lot. Do you have any recommendations? Did you have to do the desk scan to figure out what you bought in this past week?
I did get, so I showed that I was still using my water bottle. It's still an important part of my life.
All right, that's good to hear.
But
did you claim your expense to the powers that be? Do they know about your the cost of your water bottle? Not yet. All right, got it.
Not yet.
Got it. Ask for forgiveness, right? Not for permission.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, I've got a bunch of like things that I run in like in a virtual machine or other processes that get run on. I mean, and so I've got a couple of Kubernetes clusters in my house because doesn't everyone? But some of those devices sometimes want a physical box. They want to run on the physical box, and so why does it look that Matt's is my shirt? Does it not say DevOps for when you read it?
It looks totally fine. I think the person in the chat is now trolling, that they may actually not be the person we thought they were. But they just like did a name collision here just to mess with us.
Yeah. So Home Assistant is one that I kind of need a physical, an actual thing, just because I need to pass a. Where's this thing?
We lost him. He's physically passing something to his probably a Raspberry Pi here off screen.
To a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah,
and so I've got this thing here. This is a USB. Oh, it's upside down. A USB device that is it connects via Zigbee. Connects via Zigbee to my power meter outside the house.
Gotcha.
And so it updates every time I'm using power, and I can see how that power has gone up and down over the course of the day versus today versus yesterday versus before. But it doesn't seem to work well on a VM or in Docker or on Kubernetes for Home Assistant. So I wanted to have a separate Pi for that, but just getting a Raspberry Pi. I mean, Raspberry Pis were like if you needed a small machine, getting a Raspberry Pi and throwing some Linux on there is like the cheapest way to do it. But you can't.
I'm laughing because you can't. Yeah, exactly. You can't even buy one.
Yeah, and you look at rpilocator.com to see when is something in stock. You finally see it in stock and you get it. But it could be. I mean, for the Pi 4, nobody in the US has had it in stock for like 4 months.
Yeah.
So, and even then, you get a Raspberry Pi. Okay, so the top line 4 you're looking at $35-$40, maybe $45, something like that. And then you have to get a power supply, because that I found that a number of like just USB wall warts aren't powerful enough for it. So you get a real one. So there's another $16. And then of course you got to get the SD card. And so that's going to be another $15-$20 unless you already have some lying around. And so you're building up this amount of money. And you still have this Raspberry Pi and a slow storage system because it's on an SD card. And so if you just spend a few dollars more, you can get something like something like this. So this is
it's just a black box. May the record show that Matt's holding up a black box.
It's a this is a device from a company called B-Link, and it's just a small PC. It's got a Celeron CPU in it.
Okay, so it's like an x86 kind of.
Yeah. Okay. 64-bit, but and it's got a network jack, two USB, 4 USBs, 2 HDMI's, and it's a good box, and it is actually, if you look at like Geekbench, it's about 4 or 5, maybe even 6 times as fast as the Raspberry Pi 4.
Interesting.
It's $130. $130 on Amazon.
I mean, that's more expensive than the Raspberry Pi, but also you can
it's not
Raspberry
it's
Pi.
not an order of magnitude.
No,
it's not even a multiple. I mean, it is you're looking at $70 probably for a Raspberry Pi that with a case and all.
Right.
You're looking at that kind of money, so it's not even double what a Raspberry Pi costs, and it's 4 or 5 times as powerful. In fact, I've got my main virtualization server, which is running Proxmox and a bunch of other things, is a 2011 Mac Mini, and this $130 box blows that out of the water.
Really?
It is so much faster.
Linux. I mean, yeah, it's a Mac Mini
for running Linux, but this thing comes with Windows 11 Pro.
Okay.
And so that was the first time I'd really played around with Windows 11 Pro. I powered this on.
How does it run? Because it
runs really well.
Okay, because it requires a TPM, which makes me think that box has a TPM in it, and it also requires is it 8 gigabytes of memory?
Oh yeah, it does.
Okay, very cool.
And it was. I mean, that was really the first time I'd really played with Windows subsystem for Linux.
Right.
Or Windows, and because it's on here. I mean, it all just works, and it's
right on.
$130. That's really great.
Now, I guess the question is would you travel with that as a dev box, or
no?
No.
So I mean, that's where something like this does come in nicely. I mean, this is that Raspberry Pi 4 with the Pi Sugar battery on the back of it. Yeah. And that's pretty hard to beat.
I think it's a good alternative to have, though, because otherwise,
it's not that much. I mean, it's probably twice the size of the Raspberry Pi, and as soon as you put a case on it, the case is about the same height as this guy, and so
it kind of looks like one of those Udo or Odoo kind of things. It looks about the same size as that. It's like their MMC kind of boxes. No, what are these? Not so much. Yeah, don't read the comments. I think it's Odoo. ODOO.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe I've got that.
Yeah, so I was really impressed with the B-Link. I mean, it's
it looks awesome.
120, 130. I mean, you can get them as low as $99 for the lower Celeron PC processor. It's amazing. It comes with a power supply. It comes with, I love it.
Sounds awesome. I'll definitely look into it because I need another Pi yet again for another project. Yeah. So the only thing I had to recommend is pretty straightforward. It's called Alice in Borderland. It's on Netflix. It is like we'll call it the Japanese Squid Game, even though it technically came before it. But it's 2 seasons. The last episode of the 2nd season was a little bit boring, so not the best ending in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
But I thought the world building was really good. And the concept is quite good. So I won't spoil it in terms of what actually happens, but it's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It is, however, gory. So if you don't like gore, there are a couple scenes in there where I actually had to shield my eyes because I'm not one for it either. There are just a couple scenes, but similar to 122 hours if you've seen this movie, not
Oh,
something I
where he
like.
has to chop
Yeah,
off his arm.
yeah, it's just like, I'm not gonna. It's
Yeah.
only be a couple. I'm just gonna. Yep.
I know where that's going. I don't want to. I don't want to see it.
Only happens once. The rest of the series is quite good, but I do really like
Yeah.
those series where they think about they make you think of morality and stuff like that by forcing you into this game and think about the philosophy behind what's actually happening. But
Yeah.
I thought it was quite good. We kind of binge watched it. I think it took us maybe 4 days, 5 days to fly through it, but would recommend it.
You're talking about that reminded me of a series that we just started watching.
Okay.
It's actually on Amazon Prime, but they're trickling it out, so you can't watch them all.
I hate that.
Amazon Prime. But it's Daisy Jones and the Six.
Interesting. All right.
It's about it's kind of like a documentary-ish kind of, but about this band and how they form and go through drugs, and it's really good. It's really a cool show.
Yeah, it's got Daisy Jones in it.
Yeah. Huh?
Riley Coe, I think, is Daisy Jones. I said Daisy Jones instead of the actress's name. Sorry.
Yeah. The character Daisy Jones is in the
it's played by Daisy Jones. Daisy Jones is herself. Yes.
So,
yeah, this looks awesome. Yeah. All right. Sorry we went a bit over there, but I'm glad we were able to finish the report. Yeah. The tail end of it kind of dragged a bit, so it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was getting a little bit tiring.
Yes.
For me.
Good job. We made it.
So I have to say one more thing. For the two people who are here, plus us two. Yes. I did my first show with Brett Fisher last week, and it was amazing.
Was it better than the show, or like not as funny? I don't know.
Just if they get a few more people than we do.
Okay, well that must have the ego at least.
I think we had about 60 people watching the stream live.
Okay. And so I got to get a few more sock puppets. I got it.
Yeah. I mean, it's got a similar number of people. Like after a week, a similar number of people have watched it afterwards as this one. It's both of them are 17. Oh wait, no, we're just at 17. There's that Brett Fisher one is at 1,700 that I've watched over the course of a
just
week.
A couple orders of magnitude. That's all.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
But it's been good. It was fun.
He's got a head start, right? Yeah.
He does have a head start.
We need to buy some of Brett's audience. You should be plugging this show on that show.
Yes.
If you want the real talk behind the scenes.
I need to get that the right way around. Yeah.
And the good jokes. Yeah. No, we'll definitely tune in. I will admit I did not listen, but I do want to listen to it. Mostly because I feel like I'm a bit behind.
Sad that you missed it.
Well, when we're talking about the container ecosystem, like honestly, it's obvious that I haven't touched base in a bit. So
this coming week we're gonna have Chad Crowell on, and he has a book out called "Acing the Kubernetes Certified Kubernetes." There
we go.
The CKA. But he's going to talk more about getting into open source projects on Kubernetes.
Right on. That's awesome.
So yeah, that's coming up on Thursday.
We will tune in. All right, sir. Should we call it?
Alrighty. Yeah, let's call it. All right, I'm going to look for that end broadcast button.
I can never find it.